So we come to the beginning before the start being the Big Bang, the conception of this universe. And what the voice told Ra was that before the start, at the beginning, there were a few things that were present: the neutrino string, the stars of the wall, the Tugh, and the Bhan. Ra says that there was a geometry before the emergence of the biverse. Remember, the string was always there from the start. Again, for me, the only way that I can see past the ring past naught is in understanding that the continuity was always there. That there is a line, that there is a geometry that goes far beyond the before of the emergence of this biverse, and that line is a line of string, which means that there is a programming agency of consciousness beyond the ring past naught that touches us. It's always dangerous to say that because it opens up a doorway for the finger of God to stick itself through the roof. Nonetheless, I don't see it that way. What I do recognize is that the consciousness that is developing here is a consciousness that has been informed at a primary level by a much more ancient consciousness from before the start. So the string was always there, and it was always there before the start. Isn't that interesting? What he's essentially saying here, that there is actually a line of geometry that is existing before the existence of our universe itself. And Ra does go to talk about it in one of the chapters in this book. When you start to conceptualize about the beginning and the conception of this universe and the trajectory that it's been following in order for it to be conceived and move towards its birth, that a great image to work with is one of Russian dolls, where you look at a Russian doll and you open it up and you find that there's another one inside it, and you look further in and you find that there's another one inside it. That actually brings us to a place of understanding that there was something set out before the conception actually took place, that there was a plan in action. And I think Ra is very careful to mention this and to suggest that sometimes it can almost feel like, oh, maybe there is a God and maybe there is something that created all of this. But what's really important to grasp here is that it is just form, principle, experimenting, growing in its patterns, learning from its patterns, and following a line of trajectory so something can come into existence that can potentially be conscious. Now, we don't know if, quote unquote, the mother of this universe that is now being conceived, that is yet to be born, is conscious itself. We don't know, and we don't have a way of knowing. What we do know is that there was a plan in action, that there was a string, a neutrino string, a line of geometry that existed before the universe was conceived. And if there was a web of consciousness already existing, then there must also be stars, because as we know, barring the exception of the Earth producing neutrinos and Jupiter producing neutrinos, neutrinos are actually produced by stars. So if there was already a neutrino web, a web of consciousness that existed before the Big Bang, then there were also stars that existed. And Ra calls these the stars of the wall. And he says, I don't have any problem recognizing that the totality is actually a form, and that darkness that we see is simply the way that our illusion works. In other words, that this is a body. It's obvious to me that there is a body. I mentioned earlier about the Navajo and this awareness of the umbilical cord. this connection between the child and the ring past not realm. There is a connection. Umbilical cord is an odd word to use because there is no way that we can really understand it in that way. But there is a connection between the biverse and what the biverse is a part of on the outside, whatever the outside happens to be. There are stars that control that entry point or that barrier point. If you want to see it in the context of mother and child, which is again a very, very loose metaphor, so let's be careful with it, that basically what you're looking at is the mechanism that allows the child to be nourished by the mother, but at some point of time, it is also the place where the rejection of the mother takes place. So these are the stars of the wall. So before the start, in the beginning, we have a line of geometry, we have a string, a source of connection with what came before the conception of this universe, and we have wall of stars that is somewhere at the edge of the mother and is the source of the connection between what is outside and what is inside, between where the universe is going to exist and be born into and where the universe is growing. Right? Now, what I find so incredibly interesting about this story so far is that usually, whenever we look at the different traditions that exist about the cosmology of the universe and how everything began and came into being, almost always there is this sense of that there was this universal consciousness, that there was this universal mind that existed before anything. And out of that came the universal form, came the universe, came you and I. However, what the voice told Ra was that actually it's a form, and it's a form that in a sense has its own patterns. It's a self-learning. It's almost like one of those computer languages, right? It's like code. It's a self-learning mechanism. And actually, it is this self-learning biomechanism that can develop to the point where some kind of consciousness can exist in it, that a universal mind can actually exist in it. And I think this is a very revolutionary concept because it really changes the perspective through which you look at life. And a really great example that Ra mentions in his teachings is that someone asked him what the difference between a dog and a human being is. And he said that the difference is the form. If the dog had a more sophisticated form, then the personality crystal that existed inside the dog would operate as a different consciousness. And essentially, a dog and a human being have the same personality crystal. Of course, the facets and where it is in the line of geometry on the fractal is different, but it's the same personality crystal. What changes the consciousness of something is the form. And the more sophisticated the form, the more sophisticated the consciousness that resides in it has the potential to be. And now it all starts to make sense is why the process begins with the development of the physical universe. And at some point of time, it becomes ready to actually be awake, to actually be conscious, to actually be self-reflective, actually consider all the parts and make a decision through being aware of all its parts. At the beginning, before the start, there was also the Tugh and the Bhan. And the Tugh is essentially the egg. When we think about human conception and how it takes place, we know that there's an egg that's located inside the sacral of the female. We know there's a seed, a sperm, which is carrying the design crystal and the magnetic monopole that comes through the male into the female. And when it meets the egg is fertilized and the conception of the child begins. Just like that, there was a primordial egg, which is the Tugh, and there was a primordial seed, which is the Bhan. Now, the Tugh, as the voice told Ra, was inside the mother, inside where it is being born, and the Bhan came from the outside. So it is actually the Tugh that contains the dormant potential of the entire universe, the cellular, physical, dormant potential of the entire universe. And it also contains a localized anti-neutrino field. The anti-neutrino field was this potential of a neutrino field, of a neutrino web. It isn't realized yet. It's just a potential. So what the Tugh is a potential of the cellular physical form of the universe, as well as a localized web of consciousness, which is dormant. So essentially, the Tugh is the yin principle. It's the primordial egg. It is the design principle. And then when we look at the Bhan that came from the outside, it contained the prime magnetic monopole. And if we know anything about the magnetic monopole and how it functions, is that actually it's always accompanying the design crystal. So what was meant to be a yang force actually contains a yin element that is the magnetic monopole. Now, that's a bit shocking. So we have the Tugh, which is the yin element, the form principle, and then we have the Bhan that is supposed to be the yang principle, but actually it has a prime design crystal and it has a prime magnetic monopole, which are form principle elements. I know that in many places Ra has said that in the beginning there were two. There was the yin and the yang, the this and that. And that's true. There is in the beginning, before the start, a this and a that. However, that this and a that is two, which is yin, and the Bhan, which is an imitation yang. So actually, what we find out and what we know already from what we've discussed, that there isn't really a yang principle in this universe yet. We're not prepared for it. What we have is the design manipulating itself to see if it can actually develop to a point where a yang principle can come in. Ra says that in the beginning was yin and yin. In the beginning, what was on the outside was yin, and what was on the inside was yin. When you look at the world now, you can see that the male of the species, what I am, is simply an archetype of imitation yang. It's such a joke. In order to understand how the life program works, we have to go back to the roots of the life program and understand it's not what everybody thinks it is. It isn't. The weakest component of the entire process is what we call the passenger. It's the personality. It's the weakest part of the process because the passenger is not truly the byproduct of a personality juxtaposed with a design. Really interesting, right? Knowing that before the start, in the beginning, was yin and yin, yin and less yin, yin and imitation yang, changes the way that you look at your own personality and changes the way in which you understand the dysfunction of your own personality. Yes, form has proved that a consciousness can exist in a physical cellular form. You and I are examples of it. And in some ways, the potential of it is that it can be self-reflective, that it can know itself and it can know the world and it can know where it's existing. And it can be conscious to that. However, it is still the weakest part of the entire construct because it's an imitation personality, because it's not a real consciousness. It's design's imitation of what it thinks. And when I use the word think, I don't mean it like it's actually thinking, but it's the pattern learning itself and growing and getting to a place where it's imitating as a personality, and through that, learning if it can actually truly house a consciousness. So one thing becomes clear actually from studying cosmology is that this isn't actually a biverse, not yet anyway. It's a universe that is learning through experimentation and hoping to develop into a biverse. And the reason that Ra actually introduced the concept of duality and juxtaposition and a this and a that is because the voice said to do so. And in a sense, there is a this and a that, but at the center of it, the origin of it, there is only yin, there is only form, there is only design consciousness.